All right, let's kick things off. Hey, everyone, welcome. It is Wednesday afternoon, so it's time for the weekly briefing. And if you haven't been here before, I'm Tim Thompson, and this is Joe Valentine from RevThink. Why don't you say hi, Joe?
Great to see you all. Excited to be talking sales today.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk sales, Joe. This is uh, this is your specialty, so we got to keep you excited about talking about sales as much as possible.
Listen, when it shifts to the other way around, then we know we got a problem. But I love it. I can't wait to get into it.
um, okay, I want to jump into this conversation because I have a feeling we're going to fill in 35, 40 minutes as we get into the nitty gritty detail of this conversation. Um, the reality is a lot of stuff is changing in the marketplace. So business owners, agency owners, production companies, studios, anybody out there looking for work um, has gone back to the well where they've already gotten jobs, already kept themselves busy, but they're finding they can't keep themselves busy enough in today's marketplace. So people are looking for a shift and a pivot. Um, and the conversation that we had I'm going to say it's last week, I kind of kicked off this whole conversation was something along the ideas of just what a real pivot looks like, how to do it well. And you said this phrase of like, you have to start orientating yourself towards possibility. And I love that as like a catchphrase of what we're going to talk about today, because so much of sales is often about leads, dollars, targets, all those things that we are constantly telling people to go after. But when it comes to a pivot and a change, you're basically painting this picture that, yeah, but if you're going to pivot, you have to understand that you're going towards something that you don't yet know, but has possibility, and orientate yourself towards possibility is a great way to kind of like picture where to start in this process.
And I know we were talking about pivot. I'd argue that it's not just related to a pivot, it's related to making sure your sales program is robust enough. If I could say that person's a lead and they've got a job and they're going to give it to me, well, then it would be very easy to pull a lead through a funnel. But that's not how any of this works, and the funnel is almost misleading in that way.
Because why? So you're saying, which I'm just going to recap a little bit, but you're saying like basically the idea of a pivot is not the whole scope of the problem, right? Pretty much anybody at any time needs to be understanding that they have a viable sales pipeline. So orientating towards possibility, even when the going is good, is something that you should understand and focus on, because you have like an abundant mentality when it comes to sales. Like the person in front of you is not the only target on the planet. You're going to have to start thinking bigger than that.
Absolutely. I always say that sales is about, in a word, abundance. And that means the conversation you're having, the prospect you're pitching, may or may not result in work, but they're not the only goal for that conversation. Everybody is a connection point to another person. And if you're doing sales properly, every conversation should turn into three, should turn into four. And one of those, if your work is good and you're in the right market, will come back to you, or you will find them and you will pull them through. But hoping every conversation is a target that you can sell to is a recipe for a lot of disappointment.
Yeah, say that again, because if you're thinking every conversation you're having is going to lead to a close, you're going to experience a lot of disappointment because most of those conversations don't immediately lead to a close.
Yeah, that's correct. And it may be that person is the person to introduce you to someone who you close. It may be that that person has an idea you should look into, right? And you go left of where you thought the conversation was going to go and end up reaching out to someone else based on sort of like that person's recommendation. You just never know. But it will be very difficult to pry the exact project that is right for you out of every person you meet. So if you are to free yourself from the expectation that you can get money out of a person and that you just open yourself up to good things happening as a result of talking to them, a lot more of those good things are going to happen.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so let's just start at the beginning, because I think that one of the first things that's good to establish is we're not saying ditch all sales and all sales habits, right? So if you're saying now, hey, there's a different scorecard than just the dollars. and when doing outreach. But there's also the possibility of making a scorecard towards simply just progress. And I kind of know your system where you like to have a lot of sales calls is you're taking your main leads and you're always moving them across that software, across those pipes to make sure you're getting closer and closer to close. And if that lead freezes, doesn't move, doesn't make any more progress, that seems to become more and more obvious that it's an unqualified lead. It's something that's not going to, and then I say fail fast. I don't think you use this term fail fast, but I want to know like stop investing in something that's not going to close, get rid of it, go find another lead. So that progression is something you always focus on, but it's often about closing. Where's the big shift when you're changing, towards in a different direction? How do I understand what's my scorecard now? It's not just closing or dollars. What would that progress look like?
So I think to start at the top of what changing a scorecard looks like, for me, it's about initiating the habit of daily exploratory outreach. If you are interested in connecting with a human being for any reason on earth, that should be part of your daily routine. Again, because you don't know where it's going to lead. I think we can talk about failing faster, but before we even get to a point where we're failing, it often feels like the pond's so small. I don't want to go back to the same client or the same prospect that I bid 3 times and didn't win with my hand out. Okay, well, who do you like in this world? Right? Tim, think about how I met you. It's through a Rev community member who I knew personally. And she said, I'm working with this guy, Tim Thompson. I went and looked at you on LinkedIn. I thought you were interesting. And I said, can you please introduce me to that guy? Now we work together. I didn't know what I wanted out of you. I just thought you were interesting.
Yeah. So the idea of exploratory outreach is something that has to be, and you're arguing that should always be part of your sales pipeline, not just when you want to make a pivot, but exploratory sales. So I'm going to come at this a little bit as just like the finance guy that I feel like this is unfair, but it's kind of fun to say that I'm required to sit through a sales phone call, right? So I'm like, okay, I'll sit through the sales phone call. And what I often hear is speculation, 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 speculation. And then I have to say, or the character I'm playing says, yeah, but is any going to turn to money? Because I'm the finance guy and I need money, right? And I kind of get tired of the salesperson only talking about speculation. I can just hear like constant speculation with no real return on investment. So, what's the balance between that ongoing, speculative, never closing language and what you're saying here, which is, hey, you're going to have to have some exploratory outreach and exploratory habits and all the stuff you're doing, almost admitting you reach out to somebody that won't convert, but something will convert, or it'll be a clue towards some further opportunity.
Yeah. So there is a point at which you can smell when a prospect is right for you. And that point is actually more about knowing yourself than it is about knowing the prospect. You know what work your business does best, and you know what an opportunity to close looks like because presumably you have closed a sale before.
Yeah.
So there's a point in a conversation where either it's going to shift toward the possibility of work that you could help them achieve, or it's not. And then you're going to walk through that lead and ask them for the next thing, or you're going to try and reel them in. And nailing that inflection point in a sales conversation is really the difference between infinite speculation and turning 10 conversations into one qualified lead.
I kind of like the picture you're painting. So the picture I paint often might sound like, hey, if you approach a lead and it's not going to convert, you might hear like the words I'm use might sound like, hey, step away from it or walk away from that lead. And you're kind of saying like, yeah, you're going towards something, it might not convert. Why don't you walk through that lead? Sure, that first step is not going to get you somewhere, but maybe from that, there's a possible next step. And you have to learn how to use the connection you have to determine what else is possible beyond them instead of like, that doesn't work. I'm going to go look at a totally different location.
100%. No connection is useless, and most connections don't lead to sales. So we wouldn't do this if it didn't work. But the way to make it work, just like you said, is to walk through it. So know when to ask for a different thing and know when to ask for the sale. So I've got a little bit of a framework for how I usually do that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah,
I was
I
going
think
to say
that
get practical right now because I'm curious now how this really works.
So if we're in an exploratory conversation, and I call everything an exploratory conversation unless there is a deal that has already, or a job that has already been discussed. So everything's exploratory. There are two questions I start every conversation with. What are you excited about in your work? And what do you wish you were doing more of? That usually gets people talking because people like talking about themselves, right? So you're listening for, can I help with the thing that they're excited about, or can I do it better than whoever's currently doing? And if they wish they were doing more of it, can I propose a solution that I could actually deliver on? If the answer is yes to one of those two things, they might be a lead, and your exploratory conversation becomes a sales conversation.
No,
All
got it. Right.
I always am prepared with what I'm excited about. One thing I bring to the conversation to tell them I'm excited about, and one thing I bring to the conversation to tell them I wish I were doing more of. So typically, you'll see if they've got work for you, but vice versa. If you share with them, right, if you have that the sales conversation is running dry, here's the thing I'm doing, I'm super excited about. Based on their response to you, you should be able to bounce off of that. I really wish I were doing more sales consulting work with solopreneur studios. Do you happen to know any solopreneurs? It's that simple. And then you have walked through a lead instead of walking away from one.
Man, I that advice was given to me easily 10 years ago. If not like 100 years ago, because it's hard to tell time anymore. Um, but the conversation I had, I think this might even be on one of our podcasts with this guy named Gareb Shamus. And he talked about always wanting to plant the seeds on what his next big project is, even though he hasn't even started that project yet. And as a fine artist, he wanted to have, I'm gonna someone make this up, I'm pretty sure this is close. He wanted to put some of his artwork in the lobby of large skyscrapers in New York City. So he had to tell people, in some way you have to inform people, I want to do this, so that other people can kind of come alongside you and say, well, I happen to know somebody who is, and then fill in the blank, and you start getting closer and closer, close to those opportunities. In a lot of way, like planting that seed and throwing it out there, allowing someone to contribute to your own journey is a big piece of filling in the blank when you're trying to pivot, trying to grow, trying to find a new market, whatever that is, because you don't yet know where you're going to land. And there's a lot of steps to getting us to that final destination.
I love the idea of planting the seed. And the reason I use the language, what are you excited about, is I'm trying to cue that you should show a little passion, right? So if I wanted to put art in the lobby of skyscrapers because I thought it would make me the most money, that's not a very compelling pitch, right? Especially for a creative business. But for me, if I feel like I've got the unlock to save a solopreneur 14 hours a week and get them selling in a way that makes them feel confident and not feel gross, can you tell the difference in the excitement in my voice?
Totally right. Yeah.
I want that thing, and I want to tell you the requisite detail about that thing so that you will trust that you can make an introduction to somebody else if you know them. It has to come from the thing you actually want.
It's funny, doing the Rekindle class with Matt, we're talking a lot about authentic and authentic language. When you just did your example, you didn't have to memorize what you said. You're just talking from the heart and it comes out very authentic. And your positioning is very clear. You know exactly what you're trying to accomplish. You can explain it. You can talk about it for 2 hours if someone allowed you to, right? Joe, we don't want to hear about it for 2 hours, but I'm just saying you could if you want to.
Caffeinated right before this meeting, Tim. So
Yeah, ready to go. But if you're but here's where I'm going to say that a lot of people that are trying to shift prospects, right, trying to find a new area, and if they're shifting only because it seems like good business, then they're going to come across not very authentic. They're going to have a hard time trying to find out how the conversation they're having now is a stepping stone towards the future. So there is some reality check of like what we're trying to accomplish and what drives us to want to accomplish that. And I think that I know that you like the idea of like the salespeople, or at least the business owner, having a really clear vision and doing their homework of what it takes to get into this new area and find those new prospects to get us there.
yeah, and so to piggyback off that, I've had a very interesting conversation with a close personal friend of mine, and his business is podcast production. So he's built a successful podcast production studio, and he called me and said, "I want to get into video. Can we talk about that?" And so I did my kind of regular discovery thing, and then I finally was like, I could tell he didn't know anything about video production. It just felt like sort of white space that he could see, which as entrepreneurs, that's what we do, right? We see white space, we run toward it. And so I just said, do you really want to get into video production, or do you just want to do more stuff that makes more dollars to your like for your current clients? And he was like, oh, just like the latter for sure, right? It was like a light bulb went off and said, it's like, well, I just want to add more value to my current clients. Like, okay, I see that video is a thing, but I can't help you sell that because you don't know or care. And you're not going to be very convincing, both from an expertise perspective and from a passion perspective, to prospective clients. So let's have a conversation about a thing you are an expert in and you are passionate about and figure out the pivot point a little bit differently.
Yeah. Okay, so one vision that's coming very clear to me is that in this journey, the compass becomes really important, right? Because it sounds like you have to be clear where north is, what your vision is, what your target is, how you're going to get there. You have to own it and want that. Be really clear. But the path itself is kind of crooked, and that's why you need that compass, so that even if you know that for a moment you're going towards this prospecting and the current person you're talking to isn't quite directly on the path, you get a sense of where they drive you back towards the path that you want to be on, or where they would take you away, and have that discernment of it's a good lead or not a good lead as you're doing that. Where do we actually start? Like, if I wanted to find a new prospect, right? Look, right now I'm hungry, right? The industry's been very slow. I'm looking at the end of the year cash flow. I definitely need to earn, I'll say like $50,000 between now and the end of this quarter. And my usual prospects, they're not calling me back. It's very, very slow. Could I close that gap today in 6 weeks till the end of the quarter? Can I find a totally new prospect, close the door, and get the targets I want?
Hypothetically, yes. And if sales were a lever you could pull and sales could come out, then you would do it already.
Right.
Right? To your point about the path, if you could assert where you want to be and draw a straight line backwards from there to where you are and walk on it, then you just would already, right? We wouldn't be talking about sales. So my advice is always get clear on the thing you want to achieve. So if it's $50,000, that's not particularly clear. You could sell $50,000 worth of plasma. That's probably not true, but like, right,
It's a lot
you
of
could sell your
plasma.
car. Yeah, you could sell your car if you needed $50,000. But so like, I want $50,000. I want it to come in the form of, I don't know, end card animations with kinetic type as a hypothetical, or 2 to 3 ways. And then who would I ideally like to do this work for? And who do I know? So you're going to create a path that's non-linear, but your outreach to prospects is based on the thing you actually want to deliver and value you actually want to add, and not just who has money and how can I take it. Because everyone can smell that on you, and then it doesn't feel so good.
Yeah, I think I want to add to that just that, desperation is never the right time to meet new people, right? So to some degree, if you're looking at a cash flow problem for the next 6 weeks, most likely you should be go to friends and family first, right? Go to the close ones just to make sure you can't close half that gap with your current organization or current prospecting. I know too many creative entrepreneurs that imagine what's around the corner is so much bigger, so much better, so much more lucrative to where they are, and they spend all this effort in something new, and they get there and turns out it's the same problem. They have to keep on selling. There's no just rainbow with a pot of gold at the end of it. So that idea to think that desperation is the moment to do that outreach, I'd say desperation might be the moment for you to realize it's time to change and to start thinking differently. But prospecting itself, it's going to take a little while to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like your point about like you can go to friends and family. Every entrepreneur has a Rolodex of people they have worked with before or almost worked with before. That means they already know you, and that means their propensity to pick up your call is significantly higher. I spoke with a studio owner who has 15 years of past clients and goes, well, it's been 5 years since I reached out to that person. And I'm like, that's a great time. Say, hey, I was thinking about you. I was thinking about you is all it takes to get over that hump sometimes. And I think we forget that.
Yeah. Or if you just thought of them because it's been 5 years and you want to close the gap, go find one more relevant thing that you can add. Hey, remember when we did this project? I just found it on my hard drive. Do you remember this person? I just noticed their LinkedIn thing. Or you can find a more something relevant to follow up with if it feels awkward. But you're totally right. Like that first shift or the first part of the shift is just like know where you're coming from. Make sure your side of the bridge is very solid before you get out there and start prospecting. We don't want to jump the whole Grand Canyon all at one big bite, right? We're gonna have to take steps when we're shifting, and a lot of that taking steps is to learn along the way. Otherwise, you're just straight gambling. My kids and I used to play this game, and we had a really long hallway, and we lived out in the woods. And when there's no moon, I know it sounds really funny if you live in the city, but when there's no moon, it is pitch black. So what we would do is those times we could start at one end of the hallway. We had a light switch, and you turned off the light switch, and you ran as fast as you could towards the end of the hallway, which is a long way. Try not to hit something and turn on the light switch at the other end. So that was the game. You can imagine like prospecting feeling that same way. It's just like turn off the light and then run as fast as you can, but not knowing where the other light switch is, you're gonna hit that wall very hard. Trust me, some of my kids hit the wall pretty hard. But like it's not a game. So like you have to have a sense of like, wait a second, I need to have some clarity when I go into that. So I'm going to find a big step, but not a step I don't understand or not something I can't really capture at the other end. Otherwise, you're literally gambling. It gets kind of crazy. You're going to just run your company up against the wall too. So I feel like that we got to give some practical advice of like this shifting is really important, especially if you're realizing you're in a segment of the industry that's drying up. Find those targets, understand them, and then use the steps along the way, the prospecting steps along the way to educate yourself to qualifying this new field. You might get halfway and go like, I thought opening credits looked really exciting, but it turns out the budgets are really bad compared to what I thought. And I don't even have that kind of team or that creative effort on my team. The cost would be too much to get up to speed. It looked good, not for me, and then move on sooner than later.
And I do think going back to your kind of two checkpoints, what am I really excited about and what do I want to do more of, will inform your ability to navigate those kind of conversations, especially in pivots. And it's okay if you get somewhere and find out it's not right, right? Like I sort of told my buddy, like, hey man, video production is not the pot of gold that you think it is. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't be in it. Obviously, a lot of us are, right? But really, you should be looking for a value-based adjacency. What is the thing you're best at? Not delivering recorded podcasts, although that is your work product, but what is the thing you're best at? Incidentally, that firm was best at content strategy. And there are about 90 other ways that content strategy can reveal itself and you can add value other than just making videos for the same people you're already making podcasts for. And the unlock usually lies somewhere in there.
Again, Joe, you might not know this, but you're bringing up the Rekindle class yet again, because that idea of like finding your secret sauce is content strategy, not creation of more and more content, is a key element to what you can provide, how you get into conversation and still be true and enjoy what you're doing instead of just leveraging one project and one client to the next one and then end up somewhere out in left field that you don't want to end up in. So that authentic nature to who you truly are is a key element to this opportunities.
I agree so much. And that secret sauce, again, is related to your value and not your work product. If your work product is good, you can probably sell that work product to a number of people and make your business go for a while. Eventually, it won't. And the thing you actually want to do is going to be somewhere in there, but you got to find it. Because there's only so many times someone can hear, I like making video, right? Or 2D animation is what I produce. Yeah, but why and why should I care is what it's all about.
Okay, so let's get super practical, and then we can, if people have questions, we can kind of turn on the cameras and ask the questions. But just really clearly, give me like a script I could read. So if I was reaching out to somebody new and I am prospecting, right? I understand now that my scorecard isn't, I'm going to try to land a job from this individual. How do I know that the conversation I'm having has made some progress? Like, what's the tipping point where like I've made enough progress? This isn't going to turn to a job. What do I ask next so that I could step, as I said earlier, step through this conversation, step away from it? What do I ask at that point? How do I get to the other side of that prospect?
I think there are two ways to do it, and it depends on the sort of quality of the conversation. If you've asserted what you're excited about or what you wish you were doing more of, there's two ways to get it. Um, who do you know that you think I should talk to, or what do you think about my plan to move forward?
Hmm.
So those are two different, again, you got to read the room, right? Some people like to be connectors. And so saying, is there anyone I should talk to is a great way to get someone to say no. But saying, who should I talk to is a great way for them to pause and think about it because however consciously or subconsciously, they don't want to let you down. So they will dig up someone to introduce you to.
Yeah.
That's for the person who sort of like feels like they want to be a connector. What do you think about my plan for moving forward is also an open-ended question that invites them to pause and give feedback. And you need to be listening for the opportunity to turn that into something else. You know, sorry,
Yeah.
but
I was going to say, no, I love that second question because people love to share their experience, their expertise. They love to show off, to give them a chance to fill in your gap. Just say, well, what do you think of it? And then let them start filling in the gap. You can kind of start mining that new resource that they're feeding you.
100%. Let's use this conversation as an example. I talked about a close personal friend who has a production studio. Guess who you like meeting, Tim?
Yeah,
My close
right.
friend with production studios, right? So we've turned this into a new business conversation, whether we were trying to or not. And that's recognizing that inflection point and pulling it through.
Yeah. I was on a call earlier today and man, this company is fascinating. And they're one of the companies I met when I was in Milan. And what they do is it almost how they position themselves and what they really do is just worlds apart when you get into like the core elements of it. And the opportunity, the excitement to be around it, to hear how they contribute to their clients and so on. You can just hear that they will be busy for the rest of their lives. The way that they're so interested in the technology they're working on, the way that they're going about it, they almost can't imagine anybody not wanting to touch the technology and the prospecting that they put out there. Not that every call they're going to make is going to turn to a job, but you can simply just capture that there's not enough years left in their life to enjoy that. And I think that's the kind of energy that you know that you have to kind of walk into that conversation. And then when you ask that person, what do you think? They're just going to add right on top of that exciting layer. They're going to say, are you kidding? I see so much even more than what you can see. I can see this capability. And then almost after that, you could say, well, that's really lovely. Do you know anybody over there? Do you know anybody at NASA? Do you know anybody at that museum space? Do you know anybody at Disney? Like whatever you're talking about, you can ask them, hey, if that's how you see it and you can imagine that, then who do you know? And that first question could lead to the second question. And now you're stepping through instead of stepping away.
Oh, 100%. Every exploratory conversation has value. If they didn't, we wouldn't do them as salespeople, right? But to your point, identifying that value and identifying kind of like the cadence of conversation to get you to the value you're seeking, while of course being open to the fact that that value might not look the way you want it to look, is kind of the key to changing our scorecard.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, I'm willing to turn this around and have other people ask you questions. I've put you to the test. I wanted to prove that you were worthy of answering other people's questions. I'm just kidding.
How'd I do on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah, yeah. Do you want me to tell you? No, I'm just.
That's
Yeah.
super
Are you
no.
prospecting right now? Is what you're doing? I just feel like that other people might have some really practical questions too, and I don't want to steal all of it, but anybody who has a certain current situation, idea, you want to get some free consulting for Joe for 5 minutes, a good time to ask a question and put it out there, because I know that this pivot is happening, and I know that there's something we all want to like understand to keep our business going and our own career going. So it's something we all have to master. There's a reality to what this situation puts us in. So yeah, if you want to raise your hand, I'm going to actually stop spotlighting us. I'll turn on everyone's camera and see what's going on here too. Um, if I'm doing two things at once, so sorry. Um, there we go. There, I can see everybody now. Hey, everyone with their camera on at least.
Hey,
Um,
everybody.
the uh, the other thing, Joe, is I often feel like we have to delegate this job to others, and so a lot of creative entrepreneurs have a salesperson, and so almost like the when you're the entrepreneur and you're having the conversation, you know exactly what when you can throw up any story, you can make up anything you want to. All that stuff comes very natural because you're the owner and you can take the vision or envision what's going to happen. But to pass on this to another individuals to run with it, that feels somewhat difficult. When you're consulting a team, what simple routines or really like clear information do you work with that everyone can kind of delegate this to somebody if they had to?
Right off the bat, everyone who has any accountability for selling also had better have some accountabilities within a culture of producing the work. So I met with an entrepreneur who hired an outside salesperson, and he knew that the salesperson wasn't a culture fit. We talked about it. And so we knew from day one. And the entrepreneur said, I knew he wasn't a culture fit, but I was really hoping that he would bring in enough revenue that it sort of wouldn't matter. And now we're getting to the point where it's sort of like visibly not working. And so he said, what should I do? I said, well, find someone who's a culture fit. There is no substitute for the passion for not just the work you do, but the way you do them. And so I often say, if you've got a producer or an artist who likes talking to people, they're much more likely to be the person you should delegate to than a person who has a Rolodex. I got a Rolodex too. It's the whole internet, right? And so I think for me, when we were talking about delegating, what are the parts, if you're an entrepreneur, what are the parts of your business that get you the most excited? Again, it's never the work product. It's always the people or the way you got there. And that's what needs to come out in these conversations.
So if I'm working with my team, um, and I'm actually trying to say to them like, hey, I need to see measurable results from the work that you're doing. I want to see some opportunity or some kind of like return on the work that we're doing. You're basically saying like, hey, if they can't engage beyond just bringing in the lead, giving you a name and number and trying to find the next lead, there's no conversion, no understanding of the work product. You're probably looking at a culture fit issue and most likely won't be able to pivot very well with you. So have some discernment with your team that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Who's first? Doug, I think Phil was first. Sorry. He didn't hit the digital button.
Thank you. In last February, when the confab small groups, there was a sheet and like there was like a series of um well discussion, and at the end was like let's get on a call, and it's like that's what I want whenever I chat with a lead, but I don't know or don't remember what's the process. Could you either like simplify what it could look like or how to come from hello to let's go on a call quickly?
Yeah. So I'll set this up. As Phil said, we basically had a worksheet, and it was, I want to say, like 7 conversation bubbles. And the very last bubble we filled in first, which is, do you have a job, or do you want to work with me? Something like that, right? Or I have a job for you. Let's say it's like that. So the last thing you want in the conversation is your future client saying, hey, I have a job for you. So then I asked the question, well, what comes before that? What do you have to say to make them have to say that? And we worked our way backwards through a conversation to like, where do you start a conversation that it can pivot from here, and end up in that one bubble? Because it's easy to know what you want from somebody. Sure, you want a job, but what do I have to say to get there? So by the way, the answer before that was, of course I can do that. And then they would say, well, then do you want to do it? Want a job? So then you say, well, what do they have to say for me to say that? And they have to ask a question. Can you do this? Of course I can do that. Want a job? Right. So then we kind of worked our way backwards. Like, what's the easiest kind of dialogue? So that's the setup. Phil, I think you're saying, well, where do I start? Like that was fun to start at the end. But if I'm at the beginning of prospecting, what's the first thing I say? Because you almost feel like that prospect wouldn't really understand why you want to get on a phone call with them, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I can, well, say hello and start a small conversation, but then I'm like, okay, well, let's move that to a sales conversation by chat, uh, which can be like challenging to be just friendly and go to a sales conversation.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. How do I go from a friendly conversation to, hey, do you have a job for me?
I love that line of thinking. And I think the answer is that it's grounded in why do you want to work with them in the first place? So have they done something that you're excited about? Do they have name brand recognition that you're craving, or do you kind of see a wide open canvas where you can assert a creative vision sort of onto them? Those are just some examples, but I really like that you did X. Here is my point of view on it. I'd love to talk about it. So you've got to give a little bit of something of you also. Nobody wants to just be sold to. You've got to prove that your expertise can come out in ways that are easy to digest and thoughtful. So typically that's not a criticism of their work, but man, I really love this main title you did. And I think it would be really cool it'd be really cool if you were thinking a little bit more about 3D in points A, B, and C. Right there, you've asserted your expertise and given them something to think about. You've given them a reason to trust that you're worth spending 20 minutes on a call with. And then, would you want to get on a call to talk about it? Makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. And I would encourage the thought process of it's probably not the first, the first part of the conversation that you win people over, but it's probably the first question you ask towards the direction of the finish line that get there. And you have to understand what question, right? It's the right question that gets you there, not the right answer that gets you there. So something along the lines of, have you ever considered doing 3D in that area? And getting their honest feedback, not as a sales pitch, like, hey, you ever consider this? Because I would give it to you, but of like, why wouldn't you? Or why did you only go in that direction and not this direction? To be curious about their process. If the answer they give you now is I would never use 3D because I was like hand drawing, it's my signature, and you're a 3D artist, you now know that prospecting has hit that point that now it's time to step through instead of step away. But this person's not going to hire you, but they might lead you towards something else. And you say, oh, I get that. That's really great. You're like so and so that does hand drawing, but what about, do you know any of these other artists? And like, oh, that's my friend that does 3D. Okay, now I'm working in the right direction. So it's opening up that conversation a second time. Is probably the first question is often easy. It's the second question that might be hard to step through. Yeah, but desire the questions. Doug, you put your hand down, but I can call you in now.
Yeah, thanks. I had a question because hi Joe, nice to meet you, and nice to
Likewise.
see you, Tim.
You too, Doug.
So earlier you guys were talking about culture fit, and if you didn't have somebody who fit the culture, you should find somebody who does, which raised in my mind, if they're not a culture fit, how could they possibly? I guess my premise is that everybody is always a salesperson for your company. They're representing you, they're public facing. So it really demands that whoever it is that you hire at any position is someone who could be selling your business or your product. And so how do you account for that aspect of it?
When you say account for it, what do you mean?
Well, so let's say you have anybody from a junior designer to a receptionist to a senior, a CD or ECD. Everybody's on the front line. Somebody walks in, they answer the phone. They have to represent the company in a way that the owner or the founder wants them to be, wants to present themselves. So that's not always a guarantee. So I guess my
like
my question is, how do you QC for that kind of thing? How do you make sure that people understand and are aligned with your values such that when they do get on the phone and somebody just by happenstance says, well, I'm really interested in talking to Tim about this aspect of your business. And like, instead of having to wait and get Tim on the phone, oh, I could talk to you about that for a moment. How do you do training? Do you do any kind, do you think it's worth engaging with your staff such that if they do get a question, they can answer it?
I do think it's worth it. I understand your question, and it's a really good one. I believe really strongly that it's incumbent on the entrepreneur to articulate values, principles, and ideal ways of working. So presumably they're going to know your values or at least have intuited them if they're a culture fit. Putting pen to paper on those things and saying out loud, these are what we stand for, and this is language I encourage you to use is part of it. Most skip that step because they assume people get them.
Yeah, yeah.
But then your
That's
ways of
the issue. I think most people do skip that step.
Yeah.
totally. And it makes sense at a certain point when you're really small and all the business is coming in. But your
Yeah,
ideal ways of working too, not just we do 3D animation, but we do 3D for consumer brands who want to be on YouTube. That's a terrible example, but articulating a way of working to your staff so they know when they hear it, that's a way of working that this sort of studio is built for.
right.
Now
And
I'm prepared to at least engage, if not kind of pull that lead a little further through.
Yeah.
yeah,
It sounds
because
like
you
the
want
positioning.
alignment in the
Okay.
sense that whether Tim picks up the phone or Ryan or you, that they get not the exact same verbiage, but something very close to the ballpark.
Yeah,
Okay,
it sounds
that's
like
all.
almost like the pressure we put on positioning is that's the reason why we put the pressure on there of like you should be really clear of who you serve, why you serve them, where you are, what you do, that other people
Exactly.
could clearly understand that position and replicate that or explain that
Right.
to people. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's easier because I'm a solopreneur. So when I pick up the phone, I'm picking up the phone.
Yeah.
I still have issues because I'm insecure and I get flustered and maybe I don't say the right thing or
Yeah.
I snap my fingers and I'm mad at myself. But I consider that learning. So
Absolutely.
I do a postmortem and say, oh, this was a mistake or that was a good one or that seemed to make some progress.
And to Tim's point about a compass, that can happen mid-conversation. If you're getting away from the way you want to represent yourself and you can catch it in real time, you can always pull it back. So that practice of even post-morteming yourself, I think is incredibly thoughtful, Doug. I think it's really cool.
I just
Yeah,
had that problem. I just had a
it's
problem where somebody had,
probably the most frightening thing I do.
yeah. Yeah. EB,
Anyway,
how are you?
Hi.
Good to see
Uh,
you.
uh, our business, I feel like has the pipeline for sales has changed a lot, or there is the business being a production company, first of all, means so many different things to so many different people. And there was for many years a very, very established pipeline for how production companies got work through reps who knew agencies, who knew, et cetera. Now, of course, that's all been sort of bifurcated. There's so many different people. The more people I talk to in our particular kind of work, the more are sort of saying like, yeah, there isn't really like a sales person or pipeline or thing for what you do. You're just sort of like out there. And so one of the things that we're struggling with is who in a company or who along a pipeline is the right person to even be talking to. And do they even know anymore that they're the right person to be talking to? Because we production companies for so many years had a person in between them and the clients, and now we don't have that. So just wondering, like, in terms of sort of, I've also never really had luck with cold outreach, but in terms of figuring out like the landscape of your leads, if that makes sense, like figuring like who actually is the person who I'm trying to find. Um,
Yeah.
what kind of roles, especially with the loss of like people are just out less. I feel like they're out in the world less. I know I'm out in the world less. I feel like I meet less people. I feel like even trying to identify like what conference I should go to, if I should go to one, like what one, like a marketing conference or like all that kind of stuff. So in a world where maybe I'm not looking to pivot, but it seems like the world around me is sort of pivoting to something different. How do you think like I have to establish a new sales pipeline, not because I've changed, but because, and there's work still being done in my space. It's not necessarily like I feel like it's going away.
Yeah.
It's just the landscape of where those leads come from is looking really
Yeah.
different. Like
And you,
that.
just for context, EB, your I know this about you, but you are talking about production company in a very traditional sense. You
Yeah.
have directors, camera crews shooting stuff, storyline that way. And in a very traditional sense, the way you used to do that is you'd have a rep that like, or almost like a management rep that would
Yeah.
promote the artist, the director to get them out there and pitch them upstream. And that entire human class seems to have disappeared, huh? That whole representation field doesn't exist in the same way anymore. And almost everybody thinks they're a production company because you get a YouTuber with the camera and they do something. So it's
You don't
really
have to tell
been
me.
homogenized to something that's hard to differentiate. Yeah, that's a good question. So asking
Yeah.
a question like how would I actually identify that exact target to hit with my sales arrow is a hard one to find nowadays. Yeah. What do you say, Joe?
Well, it really is. But that shift is consistent with the shift that I believe in, sort of like moving toward abundance instead of moving toward pulling leads through. We used to ask ourselves, and when I was coming up in agencies too, who's the decision maker? Who's the decision maker? Get to the decision maker. The way I'm thinking about this now is who is my advocate? So, who in any given organization who might ever hire me is going to be the most excited about the value I bring? And then we'll worry about getting to the decision maker later. But I wonder if that reframing of like who's the right person is just like who's the person who's going to be the most pumped about the thing I have to say. I think it will lead to more natural types of sales conversations, which I know, Tim, we've talked about this. Relationship building is what pulls a sale through. It's very rarely going to be my ability to do X 10% better and cheaper than someone else.
Yeah. Yeah,
Totally.
the conference at question two is interesting because you're looking for, in a way, imagine a conferences of just a bunch of uh, directors.
Yeah.
It would be fun and they would tell a lot of stories, but we wouldn't make a lot of progress towards prospecting, would we? So you
No.
almost want to find in your own imagination, understand who that creative partner would be. Like, where would your services collaborate well with someone else's services? So maybe a software conference is not the right one for you because a bunch of coders don't need directors.
Right.
But you can imagine a design conference or some other sort of creative conference where it's like, oh, well, if they're doing post production and they
Right.
need an element shoot, or you can imagine a marketing conference where people are trying to figure out how to tell stories, and they'll tell stories anyway, digitally, live action, animated, whatever. And you get into what their problems are, what problems they're trying to sell, and how your storytelling can solve that problem. That becomes your theory, your positioning, almost your, next 2 years of social media content is talking about how that problem is and how you solve that problem.
Yeah, because I imagine the people on the other end are in the same boat where they're used to having someone deliver this to them and they don't now. So it's
That's
like
right.
now we have to find each other in a world where we don't have people making that sort of delivery system. But that's a good
Yeah.
point
And
that
some of
maybe,
it is we've graduated people into the workforce that don't
yeah.
know those connections. And so they didn't even know it's supposed to be there
No,
because they've never
that's
had it.
exactly what we run into. We find people all the time who either had no idea that's the way it used to work, or the people who do, who you would think maybe were starting to look into this, is like, how could I diversify my business to do that? Are all like, oh, I have no idea how a company, we know how they make their big commercials every year, but the ocean of other stuff they need to make, like, we're not dealing with that. That's, we don't know how that gets made or who makes that. So,
Yeah.
but to your point, I think there's something to be said for like, who's going to be your biggest advocate. You essentially turn that person into your rep,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you have to sort of move from there. So that's
I
a
also
good way.
like the idea of like because I know specifically you guys are storytellers. So you would almost ask the question, well, who do we actually want to tell? Whose story do we want to tell?
Yeah.
So if it's
Yeah.
recording artists, then you kind of know closer and closer that you should be hanging out at the Sunset Marquee where they're drinking their coffee in the morning or whatever. You know what I mean? Like you get closer and closer to that group of people, and more opportunity comes, and music video comes, and whatever that pivot takes for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Phil, thanks for sharing that post. It's how old is that post? Let's have to point out there. Phil, if you're a member of community, Phil put a link here for a form of post. What do your target? Oh, I'm sorry. Who do you target with cold outreach? My eyes are not functioning right now. So just an old post, an old conversation that's taking place there. That's really great. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? any other expertise you want to share out there or challenge us with? Happy to talk about it. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan. Ryan, nice to meet you. I don't think we've met before.
Yeah, of course. I guess just to piggyback off what EB was saying, that it's you know, getting back into the audio and original music and production world after um kind of a decade away in a rock and roll and space and artist space. It's amazing the shift in this business model. And so um, I'm really excited about how to find new ways to partner up with people who are not someone I would have in the past connected with. So I think that's hearing your approach is helpful because we can definitely we just have to think about this in a new way and be open and come approach everything from that abundance place. I think that's really important. And for us, it's like trying to still do the small things, like you said, the ocean of other things that have to get done, but also being on the cutting edge of technology and trying to have accomplish both of those in the same business model is interesting and a fun challenge. But if you have any other insights on how to blend those traditional roles with just completely thinking outside the box and new ways to partner up with people.
Well, first of all, I think you should talk to EB because you guys might be
All right.
you might complement each other very well. You merge your client bases for a moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I'm into it.
Yeah. One is, I think, just to that curiosity that you already have, or just revelation that you have that there's something new, and the desire or curiosity that you want to try something new, look into the possibilities and so on. There's no doubt in the soundscape, it feels like it's turning into a hockey stick of opportunities because of so many touch points now we have, and picture and sound is just like picking up all this technology we're sticking in our ears is making it more and more viable, more and more important, more and more part of the story, and so on. So you can almost imagine that anywhere that any video or any screen touches is a need for sound, and leaning into that. And then your own unique creative approach towards that. Why would they choose you over someone else? That's where the dialogue part of your outreach is going to help, because you can hear people saying back to you. They might even say, "Oh, Ryan, it's too bad you don't." And then that's it. That's immediate. That's market feedback. Oh, wait, that I should have said that, or I need to clarify I do that, or recognize like I will never do that. Like whatever that market feedback you're getting in a conversation, but start the dialogue is so important.
That's my point. Is like that sensitivity to those words, to the understanding that, hey, that there's an opening there. Yeah. And that's why the alignment is so key in my mind.
I'm with you. It's almost like why we love social media is because people will comment the hell out of anything we put out there. Even if you don't know them, they'll start giving you some market feedback. So that is the beginning of some of those clues, isn't it? What thoughts do you have, Joe?
I like the idea of market feedback, and I can't say enough that the only criterion for taking a meeting, asking for a meeting, or even like, I don't know, DMing someone on LinkedIn, like whatever form of communication, the only criterion at this stage when you've decided that I'm going to have exploratory conversations is, do I think that's interesting? It doesn't have to be for a professional reason, right? It doesn't have to be related to your core competency. It's just like, did I see anything about that person or organization that I think is interesting? I can't stress enough, like, I know I talked about it, but like even the way you and I met, Tim, I got told this is a guy who helps us with our cash flow. cash flow for production studios. I didn't know anything about cash flow for production studios, right? Until I met you. I thought RevThink was interesting. I said, I would like to meet that guy who's doing an interesting thing. Apropos of nothing, we've become really sort of productive collaborators, other than just we thought it would be cool to meet each other. And so that may sound like serendipity, but you can rig serendipity in your favor by practicing abundance in a practical outreach driven way.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
Ryan, I
that's
know
great.
that
And
you're
have
like you're out of Boulder, so like you might have to say, hey, different locations, different trips, whatever is where you stir things up. So part of your strategy might be outreach in the physical form, getting out of there. Where EB's in Los Angeles, she's running people at the grocery store, kind of a thing. So a very different need and opportunity, but still just prospecting. Like just understanding what prospecting looks like is
You
is
have upsides though, Ryan, because there aren't 5 million of you in the same
yeah,
place.
yeah,
There's the
that's
upside
true.
but there can be a downside. So
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I love my whole approach to this side of the business is how can I help you, whoever I'm talking to, because I really think that comes back tenfold every time at a minimum. And I love to be a connector and I love, you know, getting connected with the right people.
Yeah.
And so I always find a way, like I love going into meetings or, any of these situations with how can I help you? Because I think we're such a small percentage of the world, and the more we can help one another out, the better we're all going to be.
Well, Ryan, not talking too much, but like you just basically expressed your secret sauce a little bit. You just recognize your greatest gift is being the connector. So now your prospecting has that sauce built into it, and realize your best path personally, because it fits your opportunity and your personality, is to make connections for others, and then you'll be included with it. So
Right.
not just connecting yourself, but saying, oh, you two should get together, and you're the third party for a while, creates more and more opportunity for yourself. And that's bridge making.
And I will advocate on top of that. First, I'll say I agree very strongly with you. But I used to think I was great at networking because I like connecting people and I like saying, how can I help you? And thinking laterally about their problems. The first time I kind of got out on my own and somebody asked me, how can I help you? I fucking panicked. And I was like, oh, I don't know the answer to that question, right? I didn't know what I wanted out of you. I was just really excited to talk. And so I've had to hone the things I want to say to articulate with some confidence. The thing that helps me the most is meeting a person who looks, acts, or uses their money like this. And that took some practice, honestly, because it's fun to help people and it's hard to ask for help. But I do think those two sides of the coin are very important as we talk about using an exploratory method here.
Yeah, I think every one of us knows when it comes to us selling ourselves or talking about ourselves, it's one of the hardest things that we have to understand. But the person is asking you for a legitimate reason and they want to hear it. You just have to give yourself permission to speak that out loud.
Well said.
All right. Well, it has been a good cold hour or warm hour wherever you are on the planet. It's chilly here. So thank you guys very much for being part of this conversation. And Joe, thanks for kicking this off. Again, your thoughts last week really kind of like spun this thing forward. And more, I can feel the marketplace needing to understand a different pivot as we've been expressing today, and knowing how to prospect and really changing our mental nature to get those opportunities. So for you to share that today was really great.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love
Yeah,
these
of
as
course.
I
I'll say
appreciate it.
of all you guys, it's great to thank you being part of this conversation. Thank you for being part of community. There is a new feature in community, by the way, where if you jump on there at the very top, there's like a little search bar now, and you can look through previous episodes of Weekly Briefing. I'll show you to you real quick. It's kind of cool. Right here at the top. So this is in the discussion forum I'm showing you here. But if you go to previous weekly briefings, we've tagged all of these so far. So if you want to learn about cash flow, you can see previous conversations we've had about cash flow and so on. So I'd encourage you, if anything we're doing or saying gives you understanding, you want to understand more, you can use this feature now in community. If you're not a member of community, just go to revthink.com/community and sign up. So this and many more. But thank you all again for joining us this week. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
I
See y'all.
appreciate you.